Hi, I'm Tia,
And I'm Toni.
and this is Emotions Unscripted. So we have made it to episode 2 now. How has your past week been since we did our first recording and just living life in between these episodes?
This last past week has been pretty busy, but overall, it was a really good week. I feel like it was a very productive week. So, how was your week?
For me, it was a little chaotic and very draining of my emotions, but I was able to kind of rebalance myself and be ready to kind of hop into the session today. But one of the interesting things I saw was when I was reviewing the edit of the first episode, I was listening to myself and I was like, it's so amazing how my thoughts sound so much more concise and put together than what they do when they're coming out of my mouth in the moment to myself. And so what I hear is all these different thoughts coming out at the same time. I hear all these different thoughts like going on in my head. And I was like, cannot possibly be making any sense to anybody. But being able to kind of look back at the recording, I was like, oh, look at me actually knowing something. But what it reminded me of was I was like, but why do I feel like everything comes out in a mess like that just because I'm feeling it within myself? And I started thinking about like some of the messaging that I received like early on in life in terms of like communication. And I remember I used to talk really fast. I still think I talk fast, but I have learned to slow it down a lot. And so one of the things I remember people always saying was like they couldn't understand me. And it was like, what? Because I was just going so fast. And I remember there was this one girl who also talked really fast in elementary school too. And we would just sit there and talk fast to each other. And it was like we understood each other. And we didn't have to have those awkward, like, what moments because we were on each other's same level. And then I think about times where, oh, I still remember this one time, and I don't even know why it always bothered me. But I remember this kid writing in my yearbook when I was like in the second grade. We had these little pieces of paper stapled together that we called our like little yearbooks for the year. And I remember I remember him writing, "You're a really nice person, but you can't spell." I was like, ah. And of course, I'm saying I'm almost 40 years old, and I still remember this from second grade. And so there was so many messages around my communication that kind of like created these insecure emotions within me when I talk. And even though I have all this reinforcement of I talk for a living, this is what I do. I communicate with my clients every single day. I teach them how to communicate, and for me to still sit in those core emotions of you're not a good communicator, and me holding my breath watching these recordings waiting for me to like say something stupid, and I was like, nah, you did that. And so it was always interesting, but I think that it was kind of perfect timing for this episode and being able to look at more of that core programming and where do we kind of get that initial look at emotions within our lives. And straight it to you.
Yeah, for sure. So, your story kind of makes me think about my upbringing and my childhood and the relationship with my mother. And she wasn't able to. She wasn't really able to control her emotions. She was very hot and cold. So, like, from a very young age as a child, I just knew I couldn't depend on her when it came to my emotions. Like, I had to nurture myself, take care of myself. And I think that programming from a young age, turned me into someone that's very independent, very hardworking, um, very type A. And as I've gotten older, I've had to learn to kind of unlearn that and build a better relationship with work life balance. And I just thought I was like an overachiever, but it comes from, just not feeling safe in my environment or feeling like someone's able to meet my needs. So your childhood definitely impacts your adulthood and the rest of your life. And just to be able to connect the dots and, you know, uh, put it all together, it's amazing how your childhood experiences affect your present day.
Yeah, when I think about like the hot and cold emotions, I see like I'm being presented with all of these emotions over here and then all of these emotions over there. And it's like, what am I supposed to do as a person? Because that doesn't look quite right. And that doesn't look quite right. And so I may go back and forth doing the same hot and cold, but it's not necessarily hot and cold. It's probably like lukewarm kind of, kind of thing versus the complete extremes that your mother may have had.
Exactly. And I think I just used to have certain thoughts like if she can't control her emotions, like I would have to manage her emotions sometimes because she wasn't able to. And, just kind of walking on eggshells and seeing how that impacts me today. I see how important it is. And I'm still uncovering and discovering how, my childhood has affected my present day.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about what was shown to me, it was it was more of the lack of emotions. And so I've been sitting and I've been thinking, I was like, what emotions did I see? And it was very, I don't think I ever saw my mom cry. I know I never saw my dad cry. The first time I saw my dad cry was when my mom died. And so it was like, oh, tears? We can do tears. Those are acceptable emotions. And I wouldn't say that they ever like, oh, you can't show that emotion or you can't do this, but it was very probably even a learned behavior for them too, to kind of just, you exist, you kind of suck things up and you kind of push through life. And so what we saw was more of a probably a contentment within my household. It's like everybody was kind of content. Every now and then somebody got mad because somebody did something stupid, but it was never a lot of like at each other, except for me and my brother. We were always at each other, but um, it was very kind of mellow for the most part in terms of emotions. And so then it's like when I'm having emotions inside of me, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? Because it was never demonstrated to me how you deal with this stuff.
Mhm.
But then I was thinking earlier today when I was just kind of thinking about like what we were talking about, and I thought about like survival and how much of this has been taught in order to survive, because what emotions have always been seen as weakness. You can't show emotions, you can't let people get under your skin, which is actually still a good point. You have to kind of protect yourself and not show any fear or any sadness, because people will take advantage of that. And so that's how so many generations have survived. It's like, I'm just going in here as this kind of hardcore being, and I don't want to um, allow people access to me in a way that could harm me. And so I'm a rock going in.
That almost makes me think about like a certain generation, like my grandmother's generation, and probably my mom's as well, where children are seen and not heard.
Mhm.
But from my father, he really advocated for me. And he's always like, hey, speak up, speak your truth, don't hold back. But then on my mother's side, it was much so, stay in your place, be quiet. So it was like almost this energy of being torn. And as a child, it's like, well, in one space, I can express myself. And then in another space, it's, you're supposed to suppress that or be quiet. And it just makes me think if you're a child and your parents or your caregivers are telling you to be seen and not heard, at what point do you develop your voice? At what point do you connect with your inner voice at that point?
But it makes me think about like how as we get older that comes out in different ways. And I can think about like examples of people who have had parents who kind of quiet them and were their first bullies and things like that. And they weren't able to express those emotions because they were going to be hurt by expressing those emotions. And then they get out into the real world, and when anybody challenges them, they become defensive. And so they find their voice because they feel safe out there versus they didn't feel safe in the home. But now they're on overload, and it's like, why are you attacking everybody? They just said hello. But it's like, oh, I didn't realize that it was a nice hello. I thought it was an aggressive hello. But they're unable to kind of regulate the emotions or behaviors of others, and they don't want for people to attack them or to to put them in a position where they don't feel safe anymore. And so they stand up and they develop that voice, and they're big and bold. And it's like, you didn't need to be big and bold over here. You needed to be big and bold over here when that person was quieting your voice.
It almost makes me think of like myself and when I had to use certain tools and certain methods, being in my household to protect myself, to stay in that survival mode. Like I have to protect myself, my feelings. And when you do get out of that environment and you don't have to protect yourself anymore, it's really important to learn how to use different tools and different resources, or you kind of get stuck in that same cycle
Hmm.
of being defensive. And, then you can drive people away from you in relationships.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me whenever, and I don't work with this population much, but whenever I see like women who have come out of abusive relationships, what I see, the pattern that I've seen is either they go one way or the other. And one way is that they end up right back into an abusive situation because that's what's familiar, that's what they know, and they don't necessarily recognize how to keep them safe from those avenues. And then on the other end, I see them go the complete opposite, like hardcore, nobody's ever gonna hurt me again, and they just start pushing away anything that comes close. If there's even an inkling of a discomfort, comfortable feeling. And it's like, wait a minute, that discomfort, that uncomfortable feeling was love. And you pushed it away because it was scary and it was abnormal and you're trying to protect yourself. But you just pushed away a good thing. And so it's always interesting to see like those extremes and then being able to kind of get them to a place of finding that middle ground of kind of keeping themselves safe, but also still like recognizing, when somebody is trying to be genuinely good to them too, and not pushing them away.
Bring up a really good point for women that are used to toxic environments or relationships, and that's all that they know. And it makes me think of the brackish fish. It can only live in dirty water. So if you were to put it in clean water, it would die. So essentially, some of those women, if they were to meet a good man or someone that were to treat them right, it would be like foreign to them. Like, why are you treating me like this? Because their brain, their subconscious mind's not used to that type of love.
Yeah, I have heard so many people say that they would cause arguments within their relationships because that's what was comfortable for them. That's what they always saw. And that kind of goes back to like the emotions. And a lot of households, the emotions were like supercharged, and you had two people with these high intense emotions, and they just kind of battled it out until somebody won. And what that does is that teaches that child of like, this is the normal. And it's like, no, no, no. You can have a happy, healthy relationship without all that intense emotions like setting off all the time and you bumping heads.
And I know people personally that were growing up in certain environments where all they saw was fighting and arguing. So then when they got in a relationship that was peaceful and kind and loving, they considered it boring, or why don't you like me, or why aren't you attracted to me? And it was like their wires were crossed.
So it's always interesting when you see that, and we're trying to be like, no, 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 you don't have to operate in that capacity. You don't have to have your emotions on 10 all the time in a relationship. We can navigate things in a more peaceful manner.
And just because you were shown love a certain way in your childhood, that doesn't mean that that met your needs, and your needs and your wants change as you get older. So it's always healthy to like check in with yourself and, reevaluate when you're a teenager, when you're an adult, like how do you want to be loved? Because the way that you were loved as a child doesn't mean that that's how you want to be loved the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that reminded me when you said that, the way that you want to be loved, and it made me think about, I always felt love within my household, but my parents were not the I love you and lovey dovey and hug and kiss on us types of parents.
Mhm.
And so when you I went into relationships later on in life, I didn't connect that, oh, this person isn't being lovey dovey. That means they're not interested in me. I connected it as this person isn't being lovey-dovey, and that's what love looks like. So it's okay. And so not everybody is going to be all lovey-dovey, but it's like, no, my parents were actually lovey-dovey with each other. Like I saw that. I saw, them spending that time together, but in my head was like, love looked like this because this is the example that I got in my home as it related to my parents' interactions with me. And so I went on into life to accept that same interaction. And then as I got older, I was like, no, I want somebody who treats me the same way that my dad treated my mom, not the same way that we interacted with my parents. I want the mom dad thing. I didn't want the dad kid or mom kid thing. And so I had to kind of recognize that what I was observing or what I was exposed to into in terms of like the love that was shown between my parents and myself is not the same as like that romantic love. And so
Mhm.
I had to understand that as I got older. And I was like, no, I want that emotional connection. I don't want the understanding of love based on I'm here for you and I support you and things like that. No, well, I don't care about the I love yous, but I want the hugs and the kisses and like the physical affection and those types of things.
Yeah, and it makes me think about my childhood with my parents. They weren't very physically affectionate with each other, and in front of me at least, and that impacted my love languages. I believe because at that point I was so like detached from my mom. Then when I actually got in relationships, I saw how affectionate people were, and I'm like, ugh, like it was cringy to me because I
Hmm.
just didn't feel comfortable with all of the affection, and that's truly one thing that I had to unlearn as I've grown up. Like it's okay to be affectionate, it's okay to hug. And I think we all have different levels of affection. I will never be as affectionate as my husband because he is just like 100% affectionate. But I feel like it's certain things that we can improve on and we can grow on so we can, be more affectionate and, be the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think about what we demonstrate to our children too. And it's like, okay, we're looking at our core development in terms of our emotions, and it's like, what are we doing with them, that next generation of kids? And I always say, I I hope I don't come off as hot and cold as your mother did, but I also came from an environment of like, shut up and suck it up and what are you crying for? I'm gonna give you something to cry for. And so I come from that, but I also know the benefits of being able to express your emotions. And so at some points I'm like, it's okay to cry. And other times I'm like, what are you crying about? I'm like, there's nothing to be crying about. Nothing happened, kind of thing. And so I always try to be aware of it, but I know I can't be like 100% perfect in that. Um, but I catch myself and I try to go back and apologize when I need to, and I also listen to like the needs of my children. One of the important things that I remember is when I used to work with juvenile delinquents. One of the things that I heard like consistently is like, oh, my parents don't care about me, my parents don't love me, they don't understand my needs and things like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, do my kids feel the same way? And so of course I'm having to like run home and ask each one of my kids how they feel. And my oldest daughter, this she was probably maybe about 15 at this time, like she's 17 now, and she was like those hugs and kisses and things that you used to give us all the time when we were little. She's like, we didn't need them then. We need them now. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I tried pouring into them as kids, all the hugs and kisses, and I love yous and all that kind of stuff. But as they grew, I let them go and, granted them more autonomy to be able to kind of be who they wanted to be. And I didn't give out their space and stuff like that. But it was like, no, we need that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I had to remember to start making sure that I was still showing them the same emotions that I showed my younger two.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up a good point because it makes me think about like all of my kiddos and like I feel like they all need something different.
Mhm.
Like one of them may love all the hugs and kisses, and I try to give them all of those things, but I try to like listen to like what they need in that moment. And you brought up the point of like really listening to their needs. Like they come home and they're telling you a story about Legos and, really getting involved and listening to that Lego story. And then they walk off and they're fine. And it's like, as long as they feel heard and they feel that they connected with me, I think that I'm doing my job at that point.
Yeah. And so I second that whole, they all have their own different needs and their own different set of emotions. And I always think about, and I say this all the time, and it's like I gave my kids the gift of being able to express their emotions, and now I feel like they cry all the time. I was like, oh my gosh, I created crybabies. I can't deal with this. And so it's so hard, like navigating. I want them to have the skill, but I don't want to have to deal with the skill.
And also, like with giving them that freedom of speech and connecting with their voice, it kind of keeps you sharp too, because they'll hold you accountable. They'll let you know, like, mommy this or mommy that. So I appreciate that, but I feel like it keeps me sharp as well and just makes me into a better mom.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of this TikTok I saw a while ago, and I wish I remembered who the creator was, but my ADHD brain would not allow for that. And so, but I remember she was talking about having like physically like disciplined her child, like she had like popped him on the leg or something for some kind of behavior that he was doing, and he like turns to her and he's like, I am so disappointed in you. Is that how we handle our emotions? And I was like, I was like, oh my gosh. And she's like, I felt so bad. Like I should go sit in timeout because no, that is not how we deal with our emotions. And so I love that this next generation, of course, I got to give ourselves credit because we're raising this next generation, that they're able to communicate those emotions and be able to hold people accountable, even their own parents, because parents need to be held accountable too for how they express their emotions towards their children.
And it just makes us better parents. I think if more parents looked at their children as, they came in this lifetime with their own agenda and their own plan, and we're just here to guide them and, really help them on their path. But I feel like as you grow with your children, if you're able to like grow with them as they get older, when they are adults, they're going to be able to meet us as people and appreciate us and see our values, and we're still going to be able to have that great relationship when we're when we're both adults.
Mhm. And I had saw something one time, and it says, that you did good at raising your children if they're still talking to you in adulthood. And
I
so,
saw
yeah.
I saw one TikTok and it said that all parents, when your kids get older, are going to give you a performance review.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that I pass the test. But it also makes me think about like a couple of years ago, I was taking my dad to get a new phone because he's on my phone plan, and I was taking him to get a new phone, and I got him a new watch too, and he was like, "See, this is what you get when you're a good dad." And I was like, "Yeah, this is what you get when you're a good dad." And so, when you are doing your part as a parent, when you are making sure your kids are taken care of and are doing your best to kind of make sure they grow in terms of like their physical strength and their mental strength, their emotional abilities, their spiritual strengths, those things like that, then you'll be rewarded for that too. You get the benefit, you get to reap the benefit of your kids having balanced emotions.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't have to beg them to call you or ask them, why aren't you hanging out with me? They're going to want to hang out with you, and it'll just be effortless at that point.
Mhm. Now, of course, me and my I don't talk on the phone because it drains my energy type of thing. I still remember like, oh, I haven't talked to my dad in a little bit. Let me call him and check in. I'm gonna always call and check in, but usually he'll beat me to it because, as I always say, it's your parents' responsibilities to maintain that relationship with you.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember those check-ins with my dad. He was not a phone person, but he would call me real quick. Hey, honey boo, you doing good? Click, bye, and we're done.
Yeah, that's cute. I'm gonna start calling you Honeyboo.
Thank you. It made me think of like one time he was at work and he had just got off the phone with me, and there was a customer passing by, and she said, why don't you tell your daughter that you love her when you get off the phone? And he was like, what? Because we didn't communicate like that. And he called me back and he goes, I love you, right? This lady just said that I didn't get off the phone. I was like, Dad, I know 110% that you love me. And it's just like with those love languages, we were able to connect on a certain level where we didn't have to say, I love you.
Hmm. And that's why, yeah, going back to the love languages, that's why I was saying, like, words of affirmation don't mean anything to me. I wasn't raised that those things are important, that people demonstrated love. Love is an action and not like some words that come out of your mouth. And so if you are saying I love you, I don't even hear that if your actions aren't lining up with it. And so I am not a big I love you person. The majority of the time, if I say I love you, it's probably to one of my kids, and it's probably in response to them saying it to me first. And so, like, those words of affirmation just aren't me. And I always tell people, if you need words of affirmation, don't come to me.
Growing up, to me, love was my dad on the way home from work asking me if I wanted a bag of chips and always checking on me, always supporting me, like always putting the action behind the word love, but not necessarily saying it. To me, that's what love is.
Hmm. Yeah, and that was my dad too. We always had food on the table. We always had a home to live in. We always had his support, and that's one of the things I always remember is that at every single one of our sporting events, he was there. He had 4 kids, but he was moving in between all of these sporting events, making sure that he was there for everybody, even with like the away games and things like that. He's getting off of work early. He got to make it over here to the kids' game. Even when I was in high school and I was an athletic trainer, I wasn't even playing sports. It's like standing on the sideline, giving water and putting band-aids on people and waiting for an injury to happen. My dad was in the stands. I'm like, what are you doing here? I'm not even doing anything. But he was in the stands and he was always that supportive person.
And I think just those little moments of just appreciating, that support and that love. And as you get older, it's like, that's what I'm looking for. I want someone to support me and show me that love, in an adult relationship and connection.
Yeah. And so when I think about going all the way back to those core demonstrations that our parents provided for us, and even if it wasn't necessarily in line with what we needed now, we were able to kind of take the time to figure out what we needed now to make sure that our emotional needs were met, the emotional needs of our children are met, the emotional needs of our partners are met, and that we are connecting on more of an emotional level.
Yeah, for sure. Because I've done a lot of healing when it comes to the relationship with me and my mom. And even the shortcomings or the things that I didn't get from her, I feel that that still made me who I am today. And even certain things I didn't get, it's just a reminder of what I want to provide my kids. So I think for a lot of us, when it comes to our subconscious mind, 90 to 95% of what's back there and what's programmed, we're not aware of. So if we're able to like look at that perspective in a way that's objective, that can empower us, I feel like it comes from a very healing place.
Hmm.